The claw does not look large at first, not when it is resting in a museum drawer beside labels, calipers, foam, and the pale light of a workroom. It is a curve of bone, darkened by minerals, with one edge rising into a hook and the other sinking into shadow. In life, it would have been covered by a sheath of keratin, longer and sharper than the fossil itself. On the foot of the animal, it was held up from the ground, lifted like a folded blade, waiting above the mud of an early Cretaceous floodplain. That single claw helped change the way dinosaurs were imagined. Not alone, and not instantly, but with enough force that the old image began to crack. Dinosaurs had long been painted as heavy reptiles, slow in the body and slow in the mind, dragging themselves through warm swamps as if their own bones were a burden. Then a small predator from Montana arrived in the scientific record with long legs, grasping hands, a stiffened tail, a bird-like body, and that terrible second toe. Its name was Deinonychus. The animal itself was not a giant. It did not weigh as much as an Allosaurus, or tower like a tyrannosaur, or darken the ground with the size of a sauropod. It was closer to the scale of a large modern predator, long from snout to tail, lightly built, balanced, and dangerous because of proportion rather than bulk. Every part of it suggested motion. The hips, the limbs, the hands, the neck, the tail, and the lifted claw all pointed toward a creature that could turn, lunge, grip, and react. If lost worlds like this are what bring you back to Jurassical, subscribing keeps the next journey close. The story of Deinonychus begins in rock that formed long after the Jurassic period had ended. This was the early Cretaceous, around the time when North America was still being reshaped by inland rivers, low plains, seasonal wetlands, and the slow opening of oceans. The old Jurassic giants had not vanished everywhere, but the dinosaur world was changing. New herbivores browsed among conifers, cycads, ferns, horsetails, and the early spread of flowering plants. Predators moved along stream margins. Turtles rested near the water. Crocodile-lined reptiles watched from muddy channels. The world was green, but not in the familiar way of modern grasslands. Deinonychus antiropus is known primarily from the Cloverleaf Formation of Montana and Wyoming, with related material from the roughly comparable Antlers Formation of Oklahoma. These were not museum animals when they lived. They were inhabitants of river systems and floodplains, places where bones could be buried by sediment after death. The fossil record there does not preserve every breath or every hunt, but it does preserve enough to show that this animal was not a clumsy relic from a stagnant age. It belonged to a living, active ecosystem. The first pieces of the animal were not immediately recognized for what they would later become. In 1931, Barnum Brown and his team were working in Montana, focused largely on the bones of Tenontosaurus, a large plant-eating dinosaur that would later become closely linked with Deinonychus in scientific discussion. Among those remains were bones of a smaller meat-eater, but the material was difficult and incomplete. It waited, as fossils often do, for the right question and the right scientist. Decades later, John Ostrom of Yale returned to the rocks of Montana and found more of the animal. In 1964, he collected remains that made the shape clearer. By 1969, he had named and described Deinonychus antiropus, a theropod with a foot unlike the usual three-toed image of a meat-eating dinosaur. The second toe bore an enlarged, sharply curved claw. The hands were capable of grasping. The tail was reinforced by long bony rods. The animal seemed balanced like a drawn bow. The name means something close to terrible claw. It is direct, almost severe, and it fits the fossil. The species name, Antiropus, refers to counterbalance, a nod to the tail that helped stabilize the body. This was not a tail dragged through mud behind the animal. It was a stiffened structure held out from the hips, helping the predator control its center of mass as it ran, turned, or leapt. Even in bone, the animal resists the old image of a dinosaur as a sagging reptile. Before Deinonychus, there had already been hints that dinosaurs were more dynamic than the public often imagined. Some 19th century restorations had shown active animals. Some paleontologists had argued for bird connections long before Ostrom. But the early 20th century had settled into a slower picture. Many museum mounts stood upright like tripods, tails planted behind them, bodies heavy, heads raised by force of architecture more than by life. Dinosaurs had become enormous, impressive, and somehow dull. Into that old picture came a predator whose bones did not cooperate. The femur and lower leg suggested agility. The pelvis held the body in a horizontal posture. The neck was flexible. The jaws were armed with recurved teeth. The hands were not decorative appendages, but raptorial tools with 3 fingers and strong claws. The wrist could fold in a way that would later become important in the study of birds. The foot had a specialized second digit that could be lifted off the ground, keeping the claw sharp. One fossil animal did not create a revolution by itself, but Deinonychus gave the revolution a body. It provided a set of bones that could be pointed to, measured, drawn, compared, and mounted. It gave paleontologists a real animal through which to ask whether dinosaurs had been more bird-like, more energetic, more coordinated, and more behaviorally complex than the old restorations allowed. The change was not just artistic. It moved through anatomy, physiology, ecology, and the deep question of what birds really are. Ostrom's formal descriptions were not written as cinematic manifestos. They were anatomical papers, full of measurements, comparisons, and cautious language. But the implications were difficult to miss. The second toe, the mobile grasping hand, the stiffened tail, and the light theropod body all suggested a highly specialized predator. This was a dinosaur that seemed built around balance and attack, not around passive survival. It brought motion back into the skeleton. The quarry itself matters. Fossils do not arrive as isolated symbols. They come from sediment, from ancient landscapes, from the chemistry of burial and the accidents of preservation. The bones of Deinonychus were found in a world that also preserved Tenontosaurus, a large ornithopod with a long tail and a deep body, and the repeated association of the two animals would become one of the most discussed predator-prey relationships in dinosaur paleontology. Association is not the same thing as a photograph. Several Deinonychus individuals near Tenontosaurus remains do not prove a coordinated hunt. They prove that, in at least some places, the bones and teeth of the predator and the herbivore came together before burial. That could mean hunting. It could mean scavenging. It could mean several predators drawn independently to a carcass. It could mean a messy combination of death, feeding, drought, flood, and sediment that no living witness survived to explain. For years, the dramatic version was easy to picture. Several raptors surrounding a much larger herbivore, each one leaping in with claws raised, wearing the animal down through speed and coordination. It was a powerful image because it made Deinonychus seem not merely active, but tactical. It also gave paleontology something rare, a possible behavioral scene, not only a body plan. Yet the evidence has always required restraint. The fossils invite the question, but they do not answer it completely. A carcass on a floodplain can gather many stories. A Tenontosaurus might die from illness, drought, injury, predation, or a combination of stresses. Its body could draw small predators, crocodile-lined scavengers, insects, and eventually Deinonychus. Teeth could be shed during feeding. Bones could be trampled. Later floods could move some pieces and leave others in place. What looks like one event may be a layered record of several hours, several days, or several seasons. Recent work has made the pack hunting image more complicated. Studies of tooth chemistry have suggested that juvenile and adult Deinonychus may have eaten different foods, which is not what paleontologists would expect from a tightly coordinated mammal-like pack structure where adults provision or feed with young in the same way. This does not prove that Deinonychus was solitary in every circumstance. It does make the simple wolf pack model harder to defend. The best answer is quieter than the popular one. Deinonychus may have gathered around carcasses. It may have tolerated other individuals at feeding sites, perhaps uneasily. It may have hunted small or medium prey alone, and perhaps sometimes attacked larger animals in loose associations that were not coordinated in the way wolves or wild dogs coordinate. Social behavior is not a switch with only two positions. Between solitude and complex pack hunting there are many possible lives. The foot remains at the center of the animal. In older descriptions, the sickle claw was often imagined as a slashing weapon, something that could open the belly of prey in a single terrible motion. The idea was vivid, and it stayed in books and documentaries for decades. But claws have shapes that resist easy stories. The enlarged second claw of Deinonychus was deeply curved and strongly built for hooking. Modern comparisons suggest that it may have been better suited to gripping and pinning than to slicing like a knife. Imagine the animal closing on prey, not as a monster making theatrical cuts, but as a feathered predator trying to control a struggling body. The feet clamp down. The enlarged claws anchor into flesh or hide. The hands pull inward. The tail shifts for balance. The jaws deliver bites while the prey is held under the predator's weight. In that view, the claw is still frightening, but its role is more practical. It is a hook, a holdfast, a way to keep food from escaping. This kind of predation has a living echo in birds of prey. Hawks and eagles use their feet to restrain prey, pinning animals beneath body weight, while the beak does much of the killing and feeding. Deinonychus was not a hawk, and the comparison should not be pushed too far, but the analogy is useful because it brings the animal closer to something functional. The word raptor already means a bird that seizes. Deinonychus forces the older meaning and the dinosaurian image to overlap. That overlap is one reason the animal became so important in thinking about bird origins. Ostrom saw similarities between Deinonychus and Archaeopteryx, the famous late Jurassic bird from the Solnhofen limestone. Both belonged in the broad neighborhood of small, lightly built theropods. Both showed anatomical features that made the gap between reptile and bird seem less like a wall and more like a slope. The wrist, the shoulder, the hands, the wishbone, the feet, and the posture all became part of a larger argument. Birds did not simply appear from nowhere. They emerged from within dinosaurs. That statement, now widely accepted in paleontology, was once far more controversial. Deinonychus helped bring it back into serious focus. It made the idea of bird-like theropods harder to ignore because it gave scientists a predator whose skeleton seemed to lean toward the avian body plan. It was not a bird. It could not fly, but it stood close enough to the lineage of birds to change the question. The raptor revolution was partly about the animal itself, and partly about what the animal allowed people to see. A dinosaur could be feathered. A dinosaur could be agile. A dinosaur could hold its tail off the ground. A dinosaur could have hands capable of grasping and wrists capable of folding. A dinosaur could be close to birds, not in a vague symbolic way, but in bone-by-bone anatomical detail. The old swamp-bound creature became harder to keep alive. In a museum hall, the change is visible without a lecture. Older dinosaur mounts often feel like monuments. Newer ones feel like interrupted movement. The tails are lifted, the bodies are horizontal, the legs stand under the animal rather than sprawling beside it. The heads are angled as if listening. The skeletons no longer look like dead architecture. They look like animals caught between one step and the next. Robert Backer's famous restoration of Deinonychus helped make that new image public. The drawing showed a lean, alert predator, its body held high, its tail extended, its feet ready, and its whole frame alive with tension. Scientific illustration can sometimes move faster than museum steel. It gives people a way to see an argument before they have absorbed every anatomical detail behind it. With Deinonychus, the image carried the argument into the imagination. Still, a reconstruction is not the animal. Every drawing, every mount, Every film version is an interpretation built from evidence and shaped by the assumptions of its time. The early active reconstructions of Deinonychus were revolutionary because they corrected older sluggish images. Later feathered reconstructions corrected the early active ones. Science does not replace error with finality. It replaces one approximation with a better one, and then keeps going. Feathers are one of the clearest examples. No direct feather impressions have been found with Deinonychus itself, but close relatives among dromaeosaurids and other small theropods preserve feathers so clearly that a fully scaly Deinonychus is now difficult to defend. Its body likely carried feathers for insulation and display. Longer feathers may have been present on the arms and tail. The animal would not have looked like the naked reptilian raptors that dominated late 20th century popular culture. A feathered Deinonychus is not less frightening, it is more real. Feathers do not make a predator gentle. Owls are feathered. Eagles are feathered. Cassowaries are feathered. A covering of filaments and veined feathers would have changed the silhouette, softened the outline, hidden some of the muscle under texture, and made the animal stranger than the old scaled version. The revolution did not remove the claws, it placed them beneath plumage. Color is unknowable in detail for Deinonychus, but the environment gives room for possibility. The animal may have carried browns, ochres, grays, bands, bars, darker patches, or display markings on the limbs and tail. In wet woodland edges, a mottled body could break apart the shape. In open floodplain light, banded feathers might signal to other members of the species. The fossil does not preserve those colors, but living birds remind us that theropod bodies could be visually complex. The world around Deinonychus was not an empty stage. Tenontosaurus browsed on low vegetation and moved with a long, heavy tail. Sauropelta, an armored nodosaur, carried plates and spikes across its body. Smaller reptiles moved through leaf litter. Early mammals remained mostly hidden. Crocodilian relatives haunted the waterways. Fish, turtles, amphibians, insects, and plants completed the fabric. A predator only makes sense inside the web that feeds it and resists it. The Cloverly landscape was seasonal. At times, water would have gathered in channels and low basins, bringing animals together along river margins. At other times, drying ground would have concentrated risk. Mud could hold tracks for a few hours before another rain erased them. Bones could lie exposed long enough to be bitten, scattered, weathered, and then buried. In such places, the difference between life and fossilization was often a flood. Picture a riverbank after a dry stretch. The water has pulled back from its former edge, leaving a belt of cracked mud. Ferns lean toward the remaining channel. Conifer needles collect in shallow depressions. A Tenontosaurus steps down carefully, lowering its head to feed. Somewhere beyond the low vegetation, a shape moves with its tail level behind it. It is not huge. It does not need to be huge. Its danger is held in balance. No fossil can tell us exactly how that moment ended. Perhaps the herbivore saw the movement and turned away. Perhaps the predator was following scent rather than stalking a living animal. Perhaps several Deinonychus moved through the same area without cooperating, each one drawn by the same signs of weakness. A documentary image may want certainty, but the rock gives us partial evidence. The animal must be restored with caution. Caution does not make the animal less interesting, it makes it more convincing. A monster can do anything the story demands. A real predator must obey its body, its muscles, its hunger, its risks, and the reactions of its prey. Deinonychus was not designed for drama. It was shaped by selection. It had to survive failed attacks, broken claws, infected bites, drought, competition, parasites, and the simple fact that other animals did not want to be eaten. The skull of Deinonychus was long and relatively low, with jaws lined by serrated teeth. Those teeth curved backward, helping hold flesh once the bite landed. They were not bone-crushing tools like those of later tyrannosaurs. They were cutting and gripping teeth, suited to a predator that combined bites with claws and forelimbs. The head alone did not define the killing method. The entire body participated. The arms were important. They were not tiny ornaments. The shoulder and forelimb anatomy suggest that the hands could reach forward and inward, with curved claws that would help seize prey or brace against it. The wrist had a folding ability related to the pattern seen in birds. In life, those arms may have carried feathers, so that a predatory motion could also involve a flash of plumage, a sudden spread of feathered limbs helping balance over struggling prey. This is where the idea of stability flapping becomes useful. Some researchers have proposed that small predatory theropods, using their forelimbs for balance while pinning prey, may help explain a behavioral pathway toward the flapping stroke of birds. In this view, wings did not appear only for flight. Feathered forelimbs could first help with balance, display, insulation, brooding, maneuvering, or prey control. Evolution builds new functions by modifying old ones. Deinonychus could not fly, but it may still have belonged to a world where the pieces of flight were already present in other forms. Feathers existed before powered flight. Folding wrists existed before wings became fully modern. Grasping feet existed before perching birds filled branches. The bird body did not arrive in a single event. It accumulated through small changes across theropod lineages, and Deinonychus stands close enough to that accumulation to make the process visible. The tail, stiffened by long rods of bone, is one of the most distinctive features. It was not completely rigid like a metal bar, but it was reinforced in a way that limited some motion and gave the animal a balancing structure. During quick turns, a tail like that could help manage inertia. During a leap or a grappling moment, it could shift as a counterweight. The species name preserves this function, as if the animal's balance was important enough to become part of its identity. The lifted second toe also changed the animal's tracks. A typical theropod footprint shows 3 main toes. A dromaeosaurid holding the second digit raised would leave a more two-toed impression, with the large claw kept from dulling against the ground. Trackways from related animals show this functional pattern, even when the trackmaker cannot be named as Deinonychus itself. Footprints are not bones, but they are behavior pressed into sediment. They show the body in motion. A track is a brief fossil. It can record an animal doing something ordinary, one foot after another, through wet ground. No death is required. No skeleton has to remain. For a moment, the mud takes the shape of weight, speed, and posture. Then, sediment covers it, or water destroys it, or time erases it. When it survives, it can reveal what bones only imply. The raised toe of a raptor is one of those moments where anatomy and movement meet. Deinonychus belonged to Dromaeosauridae, the broader family of sickle-clawed theropods that includes animals such as Velociraptor, Dromaeosaurus, Microraptor, and later large forms like Utahraptor. The group was not one shape repeated across time. Some were small, some were larger, some lived in forests, some moved across more open ground, some preserved long feathers on arms and legs. Together, they show that the raptor body plan was not a single experiment, but a flexible lineage. Velociraptor was smaller than the animals made famous in film, and it lived far away in late Cretaceous Asia. Deinonychus was larger and lived earlier in North America, yet popular culture blurred them together. The cinematic raptors that shaped public imagination borrowed heavily from the body and size of Deinonychus while carrying the name Velociraptor. In a strange way, Deinonychus helped transform dinosaurs in science and then hid behind another name in the public mind. The real animal does not need the borrowed drama. It is enough to stand beside the fossil foot and understand what it meant. The toe lifted. The claw curved. The leg carried weight on the other digits. The tail balanced the body behind. The arms reached forward. The teeth waited in the skull. All of it belonged to a predator, not much taller than a person at the hip, moving through a world of larger animals and constant uncertainty. The revolution that followed was not only about speed, it was about metabolism, posture, intelligence, growth, behavior, and ancestry. If Deinonychus was active, maybe many dinosaurs were active. If some theropods were close to birds, perhaps birds were living dinosaurs rather than simply relatives of dinosaurs. If dinosaur skeletons had been mounted wrongly, then museums needed to change. If art had made them too slow, then art needed to change too. This is why the phrase Dinosaur Renaissance matters. It was a scientific and cultural shift that began in the late 1960s and gained force in the 1970s. Dinosaurs became animals again, not just prehistoric symbols. They were studied as living organisms with growth rates, muscles, lungs, behavior, ecological roles, and evolutionary relationships. Deinonychus stood near the beginning of that shift, not as the only cause, but as one of its most powerful sparks. The word Renaissance can sound as though everything before it was ignorance, and that is not fair. Paleontology before Ostrom had produced careful work, major discoveries, and important insights, but the public image had grown stale. Many scientific assumptions had become too comfortable. Deinonychus disrupted that comfort. Its skeleton made a demand: explain me as I am, not as the old dinosaur stereotype expects me to be. A good fossil does that. It does not care about tradition. It holds its shape in stone until someone asks a better question. The long rods of the tail, the mobile hand, the lifted claw, the bird-like wrist, and the association with other theropods forced paleontologists to revisit problems that had been sitting in the background for decades. Was bird flight rooted in dinosaurs? Were dinosaurs warm-blooded, or at least more metabolically complex than reptiles in the usual sense? Did posture reveal activity? No single fossil answers every question. Deinonychus could not prove the metabolism of all dinosaurs. It could not prove the behavior of every dromaeosaurid. It could not show feathers directly. It did not hand paleontologists a complete account of bird origins. What it did was open a door wide enough that other evidence could pass through. Later discoveries from China, Mongolia, North America, South America, and Europe would fill that doorway with feathered theropods and transitional forms. The most important discoveries sometimes change the past and the present at once. After Deinonychus, the Mesozoic did not look the same. Museum halls changed. Scientific papers changed. Children's books changed. Films changed. The birds outside the window changed too, not physically, but in meaning. A sparrow became more than a bird. It became a small dinosaur surviving in plain sight, carrying forward a history that ran through animals like Deinonychus. That does not mean a robin is a tiny Deinonychus. Evolution is not a straight ladder from one famous fossil to one modern animal. Birds and dromaeosaurids were related branches within a much larger theropod tree. Deinonychus was more like a close cousin to the line that led to birds than a direct ancestor. But close cousins can reveal family traits. In its bones, Deinonychus made the dinosaur-bird connection easier to understand. The hand is especially important in that connection. Theropod hands changed over time, losing and modifying digits, while the wrist became capable of folding the forelimb against the body. In birds, that folding motion is part of the wing's mechanics. In Deinonychus, it was not a wing in the modern sense, but the underlying pattern was there. The same anatomical region that later helped birds fly may have helped a ground predator manage grasping, balance, or feathered display. Feathers, once thought to belong only to birds, have now been found in many non-avian dinosaurs. Some were simple filaments. Others were complex veined feathers. Some covered bodies for insulation. Some formed display structures. Some eventually became aerodynamic surfaces. This range matters because it removes the need for a single leap from scales to flight feathers. The pieces accumulated, shifted function, and created possibilities that later lineages could exploit. Deinonychus lived in that possibility. A feathered predator running beneath conifers is not yet a bird, but it belongs to a world in which bird-like anatomy was spreading through small theropods. The body plan was experimenting. Some branches stayed terrestrial. Some became gliders. Some became flyers. Some vanished without descendants. Evolution is full of experiments that do not know they are experiments. They are simply animals surviving from one generation to the next. The early Cretaceous world of Deinonychus was already moving toward the later Cretaceous, but it still carried older textures. There were no broad grasslands under its feet. Grasses, as major ecological forces, belonged to a much later world. Flowering plants were beginning their rise, but conifers, cycads, ferns, and other gymnosperm-rich communities still shaped many landscapes. The animals walked through forests and floodplains that would look green to us, but unfamiliar in almost every detail. Morning along a cloverly river would not sound like a modern woodland. There would be insects, water, wind in conifer branches, perhaps calls from pterosaurs or early birds in the distance, but no chorus of modern songbirds as we know it. The air would carry the smell of wet sediment, resin, decaying vegetation, and animal bodies. The ground would be crossed by tracks that overlapped until meaning became difficult. Herbivore feet, small theropods, crocodilian trails, turtle marks, and the two-toed impressions of a raptor-like animal. Somewhere in that mud, Deinonychus may have lowered its head to scent or inspect a mark left by another animal. Its nostrils and eyes would have read the world differently from ours. Its balance would be constant, tail held behind, head adjusting, feet placing weight with care. A predator is not always attacking. Most of its life is searching, waiting, avoiding injury, watching, resting, and deciding whether a risk is worth taking. Injury would have mattered greatly. A broken toe, a damaged claw, a bite wound from prey, or an infection could turn a successful predator into a starving one. The enlarged claw was a weapon, but it was also a vulnerability. If it snapped or tore from the sheath, the animal would lose one of its central tools. Evolution does not make perfect machines. It makes bodies that work well enough under ordinary conditions and sometimes fail under extraordinary ones. Tenontosaurus was not helpless. It was larger than Deinonychus, strongly built and capable of resistance. Its tail could swing. Its body weight alone could injure a smaller predator. A living Tenontosaurus would not stand as a target in an illustration. It would twist, kick, shove, flee, and struggle. Any predator attacking such an animal would face danger. This is one reason the pack hunting interpretation became attractive. It seemed to explain how a smaller predator might deal with much larger prey. But many carnivores feed on animals they did not kill, and many predators gather at large carcasses without forming true cooperative packs. Crocodiles, vultures, Komodo dragons, big cats, hyenas, eagles, and sharks all show different relationships between feeding, tolerance, aggression, and group presence. Fossils cannot easily separate these behaviors. Several predators at one carcass may mean cooperation, or competition, or simple attraction to the same smell of meat. The tooth evidence keeps the relationship alive. Deinonychus teeth have been found with Tenontosaurus remains in ways that strongly suggest feeding. Adult Deinonychus may have eaten Tenontosaurus often enough for the association to matter. But feeding is not identical to hunting strategy. A predator can scavenge a preferred carcass. It can kill juveniles but scavenge adults. It can sometimes attack larger prey and often take smaller prey. Real diets are usually broader than dramatic scenes. Isotope studies add another layer. Teeth record chemical signals from the food and water an animal consumed while the tooth formed. If small and large individuals show different signals, it may indicate different diets at different growth stages. In Deinonychus, that pattern has been interpreted as evidence against highly coordinated, mammal-like pack hunting across age groups. Juveniles may have pursued different prey or lived differently from adults. The raptor family, if it had one, may not have worked like wolves. This does not make Deinonychus unintelligent. It simply frees it from a borrowed mammalian model. Crocodilians, birds, monitor lizards, and many other animals show complex behavior without behaving like canids. A dromaeosaurid brain did not need to be a wolf brain to be effective. It needed to solve Deinonychus problems, finding food, avoiding danger, recognizing useful opportunities, reproducing, and navigating a changing floodplain. The brain case suggests that Deinonychus had good sensory and motor abilities by dinosaur standards. Balance, vision, coordination, and quick response would have been important in an animal using feet and forelimbs during predation. A predator that leaps, grips, and adjusts its body over struggling prey must process movement quickly. Intelligence here is not about human-like thought. It is about the body making decisions fast enough to survive. Popular culture often makes raptors clever in a way that feels almost human, opening doors, setting traps, surrounding prey with cinematic precision. The real animal was likely subtler and more interesting. It may have been alert, responsive, and capable of learning. It may have recognized individuals. It may have used displays. It may have had seasonal behaviors, courtship movements, and vocalizations that vanished without fossil trace. None of that requires turning it into a movie villain. A feathered throat could have lifted during a call. The tail might have fanned or shifted if longer feathers grew along it. The arms could have spread in display, making the animal seem larger or more vivid to rivals and mates. A living Deinonychus would have had skin, eyes, keratin, muscles, gut contents, parasites, scars, and behavior. The skeleton is only the hard frame of a much fuller animal. The eggs and nests of Deinonychus itself are not known in the way we might wish, but related theropods and broader dinosaur evidence suggest that reproduction was another area where bird-like comparisons matter. Many theropods laid eggs in nests. Some brooded them. Some arranged eggs carefully. Feathers may have helped cover eggs as much as bodies. Whether Deinonychus guarded nests or cared for young in any particular way remains uncertain, but its relatives make such questions reasonable. Uncertainty is part of the subject. It is tempting to fill every gap with a scene, because scenes feel complete. Paleontology works differently. It builds from what is preserved, what can be compared, what can be modeled, and what can be tested against living animals. The result is not a single perfect movie of the past. It is a careful reconstruction with bright areas, dim areas, and blank spaces that should remain blank until better evidence appears. That restraint is why Deinonychus still matters. It does not survive as a simple icon of pack hunting or as a fossil celebrity. It survives because it sits at the center of several honest scientific tensions: predator and scavenger, bird and dinosaur, feather and claw, active body and uncertain behavior, public image and anatomical evidence. The animal keeps asking us to update the picture without pretending the picture is finished. In the late 1960s, the public imagination was ready to shift, but it needed a shape. Deinonychus gave it one. The old dinosaur, tail dragging and slow, began to disappear. In its place came animals that ran, brooded, breathed efficiently, raised their tails, fought, displayed, and in some lineages took flight. The change did not happen evenly. Textbooks lagged, toys lagged, films lagged, and then exaggerated. But the direction had changed. The Raptor revolution also changed the way children met dinosaurs. A dinosaur was no longer only a giant. It could be small, sharp, quick, and feathered. It could be close to birds. It could be studied through behavior, not merely size. For many people, the raptor became the first dinosaur that felt truly alive, not because it was the biggest, but because it seemed as though it might move before you finished looking at it. That sense of motion is still present when you look at a good mount of Deinonychus. The skull angles forward. The arms do not hang uselessly. The legs are bent in a way that implies stored force. The tail extends as a counterweight. The lifted claw changes the entire personality of the foot. Even without feathers, even without skin, the skeleton holds a posture that feels less like display and more like interruption. A mount, however, is a decision frozen in metal. Every pose requires choices. How high should the tail be? How much should the wrist fold? How should the arms be held? How wide was the stance? How much soft tissue filled the body? How long was the keratin sheath on the claw? How much plumage should cover the limbs? These questions are answered through evidence, but also through interpretation, and interpretations change. The modern Deinonychus is usually restored with a more horizontal body, a feathered covering, and hands held in a way that respects the actual orientation of the wrists. The palms would not face downward like human hands pressing on a table. Theropod hands faced inward, more like clapping hands. This matters because small anatomical corrections accumulate into a more accurate animal. A wrong wrist can make the entire creature subtly false. The same is true of the tail. A dragging tail leaves a track. For many theropods, trackways do not show tail drag marks, which supports the view that the tail was carried off the ground. Deinonychus, with its reinforced tail, makes even less sense as an animal scraping behind itself through the mud. It was balanced from the hips, not propped like a tripod. The body was a dynamic structure. When scientists compare Deinonychus to birds, they are not saying it chirped in trees or flew through the canopy. They are saying the skeleton shares a deep history with the avian body plan. The more fossils we find, the less strange that becomes. Bird-like dinosaurs are no longer rare exceptions. They are part of a broader pattern among theropods, especially Maniraptorans, where feathers, folding arms, wishbones, and complex behaviors appear in different combinations. Archaeopteryx remains important because it preserves feathers and a body caught near the origin of flight. But Archaeopteryx alone could not explain everything. Deinonychus showed that bird-like features existed in a ground-dwelling predator that was clearly not a bird. That made the bird connection more robust. It moved the argument away from one exceptional fossil and into a broader anatomical landscape. There is something powerful about that. The origin of birds was not hidden only in a lagoon limestone in Germany. It was also written in the bones of a predator from Montana. It was in the wrist, the shoulder, the tail, the foot, and the hand. Different rocks, different animals, different environments, but connected by anatomy. Deep time does not preserve a single path. It preserves fragments from many paths, and science has to assemble the pattern. The Raptor body plan also helps explain why the public became fascinated with predatory dinosaurs that were not giants. Tyrannosaurus had size. Spinosaurus had strangeness. Allosaurus had classic predatory grandeur. Deinonychus had a more intimate kind of danger. It was close enough in scale to imagine beside a human, but not human in any comforting way. It was balanced, armed, and alert. A predator you could understand as an animal and still fear. Fear can distort the past. It can turn animals into villains. Dinosaurs did not live as symbols of violence. Deinonychus hunted because it had to eat. Tyrannosaurus resisted because it had to live. A carcass fed insects, scavengers, microbes, and sediment chemistry. Nothing in that world existed to tell a story for us. It simply functioned. The drama belongs partly to the ecosystem and partly to the human mind looking back. The more closely we look, the more the ecosystem replaces the monster. Deinonychus was part of a food web that included plants converting sunlight into tissue, herbivores turning that tissue into muscle and bone, predators taking some of that energy, and decomposers returning bodies to soil and water. A tooth shed beside a Tyrannosaurus rib is not just evidence of violence, it is evidence of energy moving through a Cretaceous landscape. That is why the physical anchors matter. The claw, the tooth, the tail vertebra, the Tyrannosaurus bone, the quarry map, the sediment layer, the museum label. Without those things, Deinonychus becomes too easy to reshape into whatever the present wants it to be. With them, the animal remains tied to the real Earth, to a place where floods buried bones, and where a scientist could later recognize a new form of dinosaur. John Ostrom's work did not occur in isolation. It belonged to Yale collections, field crews, preparators, illustrators, students, and a broader scientific community arguing over dinosaur biology. Robert Bakker, one of Ostrom's students, became a major public voice for active, warm-blooded dinosaurs. Their ideas were debated, accepted in part, revised in part, and challenged in part. Revolutions in science are rarely clean. They are made of arguments that continue after the first excitement fades. Warm-bloodedness itself is a complex subject. Dinosaurs were not simply modern lizards scaled up, but they were not all identical to mammals either. Evidence from growth rates, bone tissue, posture, respiratory anatomy, and living birds suggests many dinosaurs had elevated metabolisms or metabolic strategies unlike typical reptiles. Deinonychus contributed to this discussion because its anatomy implied activity. But metabolism cannot be read from one claw. It has to be built from many lines of evidence. The bird connection eventually became one of the strongest parts of the revolution. Today, birds are classified within Dinosauria. They are avian dinosaurs, the surviving branch of a much larger dinosaurian tree. That means the extinction at the end of the Cretaceous did not kill every dinosaur. It killed the non-avian dinosaurs. The lineage that gave rise to birds passed through the catastrophe and continued into the present. Every living bird carries that inheritance in modified form. The wishbone, the hollow bones, the eggs, the scales on the feet, the feathers, the folded wing, the rapid motions of the head, the alert eye. A pigeon on a station roof is not a raptor from the Cloverleaf Formation, but it belongs to the same vast evolutionary history. After Deinonychus, that connection became easier to feel. Raptors, in the dinosaur sense, were not all the same. Microraptor, from early Cretaceous China, was small and feathered on both arms and legs, possibly capable of gliding or some form of aerial locomotion. Velociraptor, from Mongolia, was a desert predator smaller than its cinematic reputation. Utahraptor was much larger, showing that the sickle-clawed design could scale upward. These animals together reveal a family of experiments around grasping, feathers, balance, and predation. Deinonychus sits among them as the fossil that woke the public imagination first. It was not the oldest raptor. It was not the largest. It was not the most completely feathered fossil ever found. Its importance comes from timing, anatomy, and interpretation. It arrived when paleontology was ready for a challenge, and it carried the right combination of features to make the challenge impossible to ignore. The early Cretaceous had its own pressures. North America was changing, and the interior of the continent would later be flooded by the Western Interior Seaway. In Deinonychus time, rivers and floodplains still linked habitats across broad regions. Sediments accumulated in basins. Dinosaur faunas shifted. The old Jurassic world was gone, but not forgotten in the body plans that persisted. Sauropods still lived. Ornithopods diversified. Armored dinosaurs remained important. Theropods explored new forms. Tenontosaurus was one of the central herbivores in this story. It could reach several meters in length, with a long tail and a body suited to processing plant material. It was not the most famous dinosaur of its age, but it matters because its fossils repeatedly appear in connection with Deinonychus. In many ways, Tenontosaurus is the silent partner of the raptor revolution. Without that prey association, the behavioral story of Deinonychus would have been very different. A Tenontosaurus skeleton with shed Deinonychus teeth nearby is not a simple scene, but it is a strong clue. Teeth are lost during feeding. Carnivorous dinosaurs replaced teeth throughout life, and a predator biting into a carcass could leave a record of its presence in the sediment. A tooth can fall unnoticed, become buried with the body it fed upon, and later become a tiny witness to a relationship between species. The tooth is smaller than the claw, but in some ways more intimate. A claw tells us about capacity. A tooth beside bone tells us about contact. It says that at least one Deinonychus mouth met Tenontosaurus flesh. It does not say whether the prey was alive at the beginning. It does not say whether one predator fed or several. But it brings the animals together in the same ancient moment of hunger, death, and burial. From that contact, entire scenes have been built. Some are plausible, some go too far. A cautious reconstruction might show a Deinonychus feeding from a carcass while another watches from a distance. It might show individuals arriving separately. It might show a juvenile staying away from adults, vulnerable not only to the prey but to larger members of its own species. It might show the predator taking smaller animals most days and only rarely approaching a Deinonychus. Cannibalism and aggression are also possible in predatory assemblages. Modern carnivores that gather around carcasses often compete fiercely. Younger individuals can be at risk. Wounds happen. Dominance does not require cooperation. If several Deinonychus came to the same carcass, the social scene could have been tense, noisy, and unstable. The word pack may be too neat for such a situation. A feeding aggregation may be closer, though even that is an interpretation. The public likes coordinated predators because coordination feels intelligent. But intelligence in deep time may leave few marks. A healed injury can show survival. A trackway can show movement. A nest can suggest reproductive behavior. A cluster of individuals can suggest association. None of these easily reveals intention. The mind of Deinonychus is gone. What remains is anatomy and context. Even so, behavior is not unreachable. It is approached through probabilities. The raised claw probably had a function in predation because of its size, shape, and comparisons with living animals. The tail probably helped with balance because of its structure. The hands likely grasped because of their proportions. Feathers likely covered the body because of evidence from close relatives. Each statement has a degree of confidence. Together, they form an animal. Deinonychus may have hunted from cover, using bursts of speed rather than long-distance pursuit. The limbs were long, but the foot was not built exactly like that of a pure cursorial specialist. Its grasping features suggest a predator that closed distance, seized, and controlled. It may have targeted animals near its own size more often than giants. Small ornithopods, juvenile herbivores, lizards, mammals, and carcasses could all have been part of its life. The old idea of the sickle claw as a disemboweling blade is now treated with caution. Experiments and comparisons have suggested that the claw may not have worked efficiently as a slicing instrument. Its curve and position make better sense as a gripping or anchoring tool. This does not reduce its danger. A hook that pins struggling prey can be as lethal as a blade, especially when combined with body weight, forelimbs, and biting jaws. The claw sheath in life would have extended beyond the bony core. Fossils preserve the internal support, not the full keratin covering. The living claw would have been sharper, darker perhaps, and subject to wear and growth. Holding it off the ground protected that edge. Every step placed weight on the other toes while the second digit remained lifted. The animal walked with a weapon folded into its stride. There is an elegance to that design. The foot is both ordinary and extraordinary. It carries the animal through mud, over roots, across river sand, and beside carcasses. Then, in an instant, the hidden function becomes central. The lifted toe drops or flexes. The claw engages. The body comes down over prey. The same limb that walked quietly becomes a restraint system. Such elegance is easy to overstate. Evolution does not design with foresight. The sickle claw evolved through generations of slight advantages, each one linked to survival and reproduction. It may have changed function over time. It may have served display as well as predation. It may have been used differently by juveniles and adults. A structure this conspicuous probably mattered in several ways, and no single explanation should be made too narrow. The hand claws, too, were curved and useful. In a grappling model, the forelimbs help hold prey, pulling it against the body or preventing escape. The arms also may have helped the animal rise from resting positions, maneuver during social interactions, or manipulate objects in limited ways. They were not hands like ours, and they were not wings like a bird's, but they occupied an important middle ground. Middle grounds are where Deinonychus has always been most powerful. It stands between the old dinosaur image and the new one, between reptile and bird in public understanding, between solitary predator and possible social animal, between ground-running hunter and the feathered world that would eventually produce flight. It is not a missing link in a simplistic chain. It is a branch that reveals the shape of the tree. The tree was already vast by the time Deinonychus lived. Dinosaurs had been evolving for well over 100 million years. The Triassic origin, the Jurassic expansion, the rise of sauropods, stegosaurs, ornithopods, and theropod lineages had all come before. Deinonychus was not the beginning of dinosaur history. It was a late and specialized expression of a much older success. The Raptor revolution, then, was partly a correction in human time. Dinosaurs themselves did not become active in 1969. They had always been active when alive. It was our image that changed. The fossil did not transform the Cretaceous. It transformed the 20th century imagination of the Cretaceous. That distinction matters because it reminds us that scientific revolutions reveal something ancient, but they happen in the present. In classrooms and museums, that transformation had consequences. Children who saw active dinosaurs grew into scientists who asked different questions. Artists drew animals with muscles and plausible movement. Museum preparators remounted skeletons. Paleontologists looked again at bone histology, trackways, nesting sites, respiratory structures, and the bird-dinosaur relationship. Deinonychus helped shift the center of attention from dinosaurs as dead giants to dinosaurs as living organisms. The animal also changed how paleontologists talked about predatory dinosaurs. Instead of treating large theropods as upright reptilian brutes, researchers began examining balance, locomotion, biomechanics, feeding traces, and prey relationships. A predator had to be understood as a functional system. Teeth alone were not enough. Legs, arms, claws, sensory organs, and environment all mattered. That system's view makes the world of Deinonychus richer. The predator is only one part of the frame. Around it are plants growing from floodplain soil, seasonal rains filling channels, herbivores feeding and migrating, insects breeding in wet places, crocodilian relatives taking fish, turtles basking, small mammals hiding at night, and pterosaurs crossing the air above river bends. The revolution begins with a claw, but it widens into an ecosystem. In that ecosystem, Deinonychus was not always the top danger. Larger theropods existed in some early Cretaceous North American environments, including Acrocanthosaurus farther south and in roughly related faunal settings. Crocodile-line predators could threaten animals near water. Disease and drought killed without teeth. Floods could bury the strong and weak together. A raptor survived by choosing risks carefully. Fossil formations do not always preserve animals from exactly the same place or moment, so faunal comparisons must be handled with caution. The Cloverleaf and Antlers formations are not a single habitat copied across a continent. They are deposits from related intervals with their own local conditions. Deinonychus, Tenontosaurus, and other animals appear within this broader early Cretaceous pattern, but each quarry records its own version of the world. The Antlers Formation in Oklahoma has yielded Deinonychus material as well, reinforcing the idea that this predator ranged beyond one Montana locality. In those southern deposits, the environment included river systems draining through warm landscapes where large theropods, sauropods, ornithopods, and smaller animals formed a different but connected ecological picture. The raptor was not a local accident. It was part of a wider North American dinosaur fauna. Geographic range matters because an animal spread across multiple regions must adapt to variation. It may encounter different prey communities, different seasonal patterns, different vegetation, and different competitors. The fossils are too incomplete to map the daily life of Deinonychus across its whole range, but they suggest a predator successful enough to persist in more than one place. Its anatomy was not a fragile specialty, usable only in a narrow setting. Still, its success was temporary in the way all species are temporary. Deinonychus did not survive to the end of the Cretaceous. It belonged to a particular chapter of raptor evolution. Later dromaeosaurids would differ in size, proportion, plumage, and ecology. Some would live in arid environments, some would remain small, some would become large enough to challenge very different prey. The raptor revolution in science began with one genus, but the actual raptor story is a branching history. To follow that history, the eye moves from Montana to Mongolia, from Oklahoma to China, from isolated bones to feathered slabs. Velociraptor preserves the raised toe and predatory body in late Cretaceous Asia. Microraptor preserves long feathers on arms and legs, showing how strange and experimental small theropods could become. Other fossils preserve quill knobs, feather impressions, brooding postures, and trackways. Each discovery makes Deinonychus less alone and more understandable. The more relatives appear, the more the original fossil changes meaning. At first, Deinonychus looked startling because it seemed unusual. Later, it became startling because it was part of a pattern. Its bird-like traits were not isolated oddities. They belonged to a whole region of the theropod family tree. The revolution became stronger when Deinonychus stopped being an exception and became evidence of a wider truth. That is often how science moves. A discovery first shocks because it looks singular. Then, if the idea is right, more evidence appears and the shock becomes structure. What seemed strange becomes expected. The active, feathered, bird-like theropod is no longer a radical suggestion. It is part of the standard picture. Deinonychus helped create that standard, then quietly took its place inside it. A modern viewer may find it hard to understand how revolutionary this was. We are used to fast dinosaurs. We are used to raptors with lifted claws. We are used to hearing that birds are dinosaurs. The new picture has become familiar enough to feel obvious. But it was not obvious when the old museum halls were full of tail-dragging giants. It had to be argued into existence bone by bone. The fossil record can be persuasive because it is physical. A person can argue about posture in theory, but a skeleton with certain joint surfaces limits what is possible. A person can imagine a dragging tail, but trackways without tail marks challenge that image. A person can picture a naked raptor, but feathered relatives make that restoration less likely. The past does not speak, but it constrains the stories we tell about it. Those constraints are the difference between reconstruction and fantasy. Deinonychus can be restored with uncertainty, but not as anything at all. It had a certain number of toes, a certain kind of pelvis, a certain tail structure, a certain skull, a certain evolutionary position. Within those limits, paleontologists and artists work to create the most plausible living animal. The result changes, but it changes around evidence. The skeleton also shows that Deinonychus was a Saurischian theropod, not a bird-hipped dinosaur despite its connection to birds. This old naming confusion is one of the accidents of dinosaur classification. Birds evolved from Saurischian theropods, not from the group called Ornithischia, the bird-hipped dinosaurs. Names created in the 19th century preserved superficial observations, while later evidence revealed deeper relationships. This is another lesson from the raptor revolution. Scientific names and categories are tools, not sacred structures. They are revised when new evidence demands it. Dromaeosauridae, Maniraptora, Paraves, Avialae, and other terms help map the branching relationships among theropods and birds. The map is technical, but its meaning is simple enough. Birds belong inside the dinosaur story, and raptors help illuminate the path. A living bird folding its wing carries an echo of theropod wrists. A hawk pinning prey beneath its feet carries an echo of predatory possibilities that help us think about Deinonychus. A chicken scratching at soil carries scales, claws, and motions that would not feel wholly alien in the Mesozoic. These are not perfect windows into the past, but they are living reminders that evolution modifies rather than erases. The connection to birds also changes how we think about extinction. The dinosaur lineage did not end completely at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. It narrowed. The non-avian branches disappeared. The avian branch continued. In that sense, the Raptor revolution made dinosaurs less vanished. It placed part of the Mesozoic into the present, in feathers and eggs and hollow bones, in flight and song, and predatory eyes. Deinonychus never heard a modern bird sing. It lived tens of millions of years before the asteroid impact, long before human cities, long before grasslands spread widely, long before the mammals that would one day study its bones. Yet its skeleton helped humans understand why birds belong to dinosaurs. A dead predator became a bridge between an ancient floodplain and the living sky. The animal's own sky would have belonged to pterosaurs and early birds. Pterosaurs still dominated many aerial roles in the early Cretaceous, with membrane wings stretched from elongated fingers. Birds were diversifying, but not yet the overwhelming presence they would become later. A feathered Deinonychus on the ground existed beneath other flying reptiles and early avians, sharing the broader archosaur world in different dimensions. On the ground, the vegetation shaped movement. Conifer roots broke the soil. Fern beds hid small animals. Cycad fronds formed low barriers. Wet channels cut through floodplains. Open patches offered speed but little cover. A raptor moving through such a landscape would not simply sprint everywhere. It would choose paths, pause, watch. Perhaps use cover. Perhaps follow the edges where different habitats met. Edges are rich places. Where forest meets open floodplain, prey may feed while staying near shelter. Where water meets mud, tracks and scents gather. Where a carcass lies near a channel, scavengers approach from several directions. Deinonychus may have worked these boundaries, not as a supernatural hunter, but as an animal taking advantage of predictable patterns. Predators do not need to know ecology as a concept. They live by it. The body size of Deinonychus is often estimated in the range of a large wolf or small big cat in mass, though length from snout to tail can make it seem larger. Much of that length was tail. The body itself was compact, compared with giant theropods. This matters because length in dinosaurs can be misleading. A long tail adds measurement without adding the same bulk as a deep torso. Deinonychus was long, but not massively heavy. That lighter build would affect its hunting. It could not rely on overwhelming mass against large prey. It needed leverage, grip, speed, and timing. Against smaller animals, it may have been able to pin and bite quickly. Against larger animals, the risks multiplied. A Tenontosaurus could injure it badly. A predator that cannot afford injury must be selective. Hunger pushes risk upward, but injury can end a life. Many predators die because one hunt goes wrong. A kick breaks a jaw. A claw catches in bone. A rib cracks. A wound becomes infected. The fossil record rarely preserves these small disasters unless they heal into bone or happen at the moment of death. But every predator lineage is shaped by them. Deinonychus was not merely dangerous, it was endangered by the act of being dangerous. The same is true for its prey. Tenontosaurus, Sauropelta, small ornithopods, and other herbivores lived under constant pressure from teeth and claws. Young animals were especially vulnerable. Nests, hatchlings, juveniles, and sick adults may have provided many meals. Predators often take the accessible, not the heroic. A juvenile Tenontosaurus would be a more realistic target than a powerful adult in prime condition. The phrase prey preference should be used with care. A repeated association in fossils may indicate an important trophic relationship, but it does not tell us the full menu. Deinonychus likely ate what it could safely acquire. That may have included Tenontosaurus carcasses and juveniles, small dinosaurs, lizards, mammals, eggs, and other vertebrates. A flexible predator has a better chance during seasonal stress than one tied to a single prey item. Flexibility may also explain why juveniles and adults differed. A young Deinonychus was smaller, more vulnerable, and probably unable to tackle the same prey as an adult. It may have hunted insects, small reptiles, mammals, or hatchling dinosaurs. It may have spent more time in cover. Its lifted claw would have grown with it, but the meaning of that claw may have changed through life as body size and strength changed. Ontogeny, the process of growth, is one of the hidden stories in fossils. A species is not only its adult form. It is egg, hatchling, juvenile, subadult, adult, and aging individual. Each stage can have different risks and diets. When we say Deinonychus, we often picture a full-grown predator. But most individuals that ever lived were not preserved as ideal adults. They passed through vulnerable stages that shaped the population as much as the adult anatomy did. A juvenile raptor moving through fern cover would not experience the world like an adult. The plants would be taller relative to its eyes. Small mammals might be prey. Adult Deinonychus might be danger. The same floodplain would have different scales depending on the body moving through it. Deep time is not one landscape. It is a landscape multiplied by every species and every age class that inhabited it. At night, the floodplain changed again. Temperature dropped. Insects shifted. Small mammals emerged. Crocodilian eyes might reflect near water. A young Deinonychus, if active in dimmer hours, would navigate by senses we can only infer. Feathers would hold warmth close to the body. The lifted claw would remain folded as it moved through soft ground. The animal would be less an icon than a brief movement between plants. We do not know whether Deinonychus hunted mostly by day, dawn, dusk, or opportunistically across different light levels. Eye anatomy and comparisons may help, but they do not give a simple schedule. The safest statement is that it lived in cycles of activity and rest shaped by food, temperature, competition, and danger. A predator's day is not organized around drama. It is organized around energy. Energy links the raptor to the plants. Every bite of meat began as sunlight caught by Cretaceous vegetation. Tenontosaurus converted leaves into muscle. Deinonychus converted that muscle into motion, feathers, eggs, and bone. Microbes eventually took what remained. Fossils preserve the hard pieces, but the living system was a flow of energy across bodies. The raptor revolution made dinosaurs seem more alive, and life is always energy moving. This is why the old image of sluggish dinosaurs was not merely a posture problem. It affected the entire understanding of Mesozoic ecosystems. Slow, cold, swamp-bound dinosaurs imply one kind of world. Active, growing, social, feathered, bird-related dinosaurs imply another. The revolution changed how scientists imagined food webs, migration, parental care, predator-prey dynamics, and even the sound and movement of ancient landscapes. Once dinosaurs became active animals again, their extinction became more profound, not less. The end Cretaceous impact did not wipe out a collection of obsolete reptiles. It struck a world of thriving, diverse, dynamic animals. It ended lineages that had been successful for tens of millions of years. But because birds survived, the revolution also made extinction less absolute. The dinosaur story narrowed through catastrophe and continued on wings. Deinonychus lived far before that final catastrophe, but it helps explain why the survival of birds matters. If birds are deeply nested within theropod dinosaurs, then the small feathered bodies of the Mesozoic were not side notes. They were central to one of the greatest survival stories in vertebrate history. The branch that eventually passed through the asteroid was not the biggest branch. It was not the most fearsome. It was small, feathered, and adaptable. In this sense, the raptor revolution is not only about predators. It is about recognizing that dinosaur success came in many sizes. Sauropods showed one extreme, immense herbivorous bodies supported by columnar limbs. Tyrannosaurs showed another, giant skulls and crushing bites. Raptors showed something else: lightness, grasping, feathers, agility, and a closeness to birds that made the boundary between past and present harder to draw. The revolution also changed paleoart permanently. An artist reconstructing Deinonychus today must think about feather placement, muscle bulk, joint limits, soft tissue, posture, and ecological setting. The animal cannot simply be a green lizard with a claw. It needs a body informed by birds and by theropod anatomy. It needs the right hands, the right tail, the right foot, and a face that is not a movie mask, but a biological structure. The face is especially difficult. Fossil skulls do not preserve lips, cheeks, exact skin texture, or the full shape of soft tissue. Theropod mouth reconstructions are debated, including whether teeth were exposed or partly covered by lips. For Deinonychus, a cautious restoration should avoid certainty where the evidence is limited. The skull gives the framework. The living head was more than bone. Eyes would have changed everything. A skeleton has sockets. A living animal has gaze. Eye color, pupil shape, eyelids, surrounding skin, and feathering around the face all influence how we perceive intelligence and threat. We do not know the exact appearance, but the animal certainly did not look like bare bone. Its face moved. It blinked. It breathed. It reacted to light, sound, scent, and the motion of other animals. Breath is almost never preserved, yet it is central to life. Deinonychus breathed with a respiratory system inherited from theropod ancestors and tied, in broader dinosaur evolution, to the efficient air sac system seen in birds. The exact soft anatomy is not fully preserved, but theropod bodies were not simple reptilian bellows. Hollow bones and bird relationships suggest a more complex internal life than early restorations imagined. The chest rose and fell beneath feathers. Muscles shifted along the ribs. Air moved through passages that left only indirect traces in bone. The animal's heat, smell, and sound are gone, but they were real. A living Deinonychus was not only a pose, it was metabolism and sensation, hunger and fatigue, growth and repair. The Raptor revolution matters because it asks us to restore those invisible systems as carefully as the skeleton. Bone histology, the microscopic study of bone tissue, has been one of the tools for understanding dinosaur growth. Many dinosaurs grew faster than typical modern reptiles, depositing bone in patterns consistent with elevated growth rates. This does not give a single metabolic category for all species, but it supports the broader view that dinosaurs were biologically dynamic. Deinonychus fits into that wider reevaluation, even when the details vary by lineage. Growth would have changed its proportions. Juveniles may have had different limb ratios, different skull proportions, and different behavior from adults. A young animal might rely more on speed and concealment. An adult might use strength and experience. Fossil samples are limited, so many details remain uncertain, but no species should be imagined only through its most complete adult skeleton. The quarry preserves death, but life was mostly elsewhere. Most Deinonychus individuals were never fossilized. Their bones decayed on open ground, were carried away by scavengers, dissolved in soil, or broke apart before burial. The few that entered the fossil record did so through rare accidents. That rarity should make every bone feel less like a complete answer and more like a narrow window. Through that window, we see enough to understand why Ostrom was struck by the animal. A foot with a raised killer claw, a hand built for grasping, a tail held as counterbalance, a skeleton that refused to drag itself. These were not minor details. They changed the posture of an entire field. The fossil did not whisper. It contradicted. Scientific contradiction can be productive. It forces new explanations. If dinosaurs were sluggish, what was Deinonychus doing with this body? If birds were separate from dinosaurs, why did this theropod share so many relevant features with Archaeopteryx? If raptors were simple reptiles, why did their anatomy keep pointing toward feathers, balance, and complex behavior? The questions multiplied, and the old answers weakened. The public often remembers revolutions as sudden. In reality, the Dinosaur Renaissance unfolded through years of papers, arguments, museum changes, and discoveries. Some ideas were embraced quickly. Others were resisted. Some early claims were overstated and later corrected. This is normal. A scientific revolution is not a single clean replacement. It is a change in the kinds of explanations that seem plausible. After Deinonychus, active dinosaurs became plausible in a new way. Feathered dinosaurs later became plausible, then unavoidable. Birds as dinosaurs became plausible, then standard. Pack hunting, once plausible and dramatic, became more uncertain as new evidence complicated it. This mix of acceptance and revision is the real shape of progress. The Raptor revolution did not freeze Deinonychus into one perfect story. It kept the animal open to better evidence. There is a humility in that openness. The animal that once shattered the old image has itself been revised many times. The naked raptor became feathered. The slashing claw became a gripping claw. The coordinated pack became a debated social question. The monster became an animal. Each revision removes a little theatrical certainty and adds a little biological depth. Biological depth is quieter than spectacle. It notices the way a claw is held above the ground to protect its edge. It notices that a juvenile may eat differently from an adult. It notices that a carcass can attract competitors without proving cooperation. It notices that feathers can insulate a predator rather than make it gentle. It notices that a bone in a drawer can change the shape of a century's imagination. The drawer, the quarry, and the floodplain are all part of the same story. In the quarry, the bones are embedded in sediment, incomplete and broken. In the drawer, they become specimens, numbered and stabilized. In the paper, they become descriptions and comparisons. In the museum, they become a mount. In the public imagination, they become a raptor. At each stage, something is gained, and something can be distorted. The responsibility of reconstruction is to keep returning to the evidence. Ostrom's 1969 work remains important because it was grounded in anatomy. The excitement came from the bones themselves. The later cultural waves sometimes moved beyond the evidence, but the scientific center remained physical. That is why Deinonychus still holds up. It was not a marketing invention. It was a real animal with a body that demanded attention. A real animal also had ordinary moments. It slept. It scratched. It shed feathers. It replaced teeth. It grew new claw sheath. It drank from muddy water. It may have preened or cleaned plumage, as living birds do. It may have rested with legs folded beneath the body. It may have stood in rain, feathers darkened, tail lowered slightly, waiting for a storm to pass over the Cretaceous plain. Rain is a useful way to imagine the fossil record. A storm swells a river. A bank collapses. Sediment spreads across a low area. A carcass partly buried by mud becomes protected from total destruction. Minerals slowly enter bone. The organic body disappears. The shape remains. Millions of years later, a paleontologist splits the rock, and a fragment of that storm becomes scientific evidence. The Raptor revolution depends on such accidents. Without the right rocks, there is no specimen. Without the specimen, no description. Without the description, perhaps the old image lasts longer. Deep time is vast, but scientific knowledge often turns on small survivals. A claw preserved, a tail vertebra noticed, a quarry revisited, a comparison made with Archaeopteryx, a drawing published. A generation sees dinosaurs differently. That chain of events is almost as strange as the animal. A predator dies in the early Cretaceous. Its bones enter floodplain sediment. Mountains rise. Rocks erode. Humans appear. Science develops. Museums are built. and someone finally recognizes that the foot of this animal changes the posture of dinosaurs. The gap between the living raptor and the modern idea of the raptor is more than 100 million years wide. During that gap, continents moved. Seas advanced and retreated. The western interior seaway split North America later in the Cretaceous. Flowering plants spread, tyrannosaurs rose, birds diversified, the asteroid fell, mammals expanded, ice ages came and went. Human beings eventually learned to name rocks by age and bones by anatomy. Then, Deinonychus, already gone beyond recovery, changed the living imagination. Paleontology often works like that. The past cannot change, but our relationship to it changes constantly. Each fossil is fixed in its own history and flexible in ours. Deinonychus was always feathered or not feathered, social or not social, warm or not warm, in the exact way it truly lived. We are the ones moving closer and farther from the truth as evidence improves. The truth itself was a floodplain animal. It did not know it was part of a revolution. It did not know its lifted claw would become famous. It did not know humans would debate its hunting behavior, feathering, metabolism, and connection to birds. It lived inside the concerns of its own body: hunger, heat, pain, reproduction, risk. The future meaning of its bones was irrelevant to the animal carrying them. That may be the best way to bring Deinonychus back down from the icon. Let it be an animal again. Let it move through fern shadow without music. Let it fail more often than it succeeds. Let it retreat from prey too dangerous to attack. Let it feed from a carcass when the chance appears. Let it call, display, rest, molt, grow, and die. The revolution is ours. The life was its own. Still, the life and the revolution remain linked. Because the animal was real, the revolution had weight. Because the bones were strange, the questions changed. Because the questions changed, later discoveries were understood differently. A feathered theropod from China made more sense in a world already prepared by Deinonychus. A bird-like wrist was not an isolated curiosity. A brooding dinosaur was not absurd. An active predator was no longer an exception. This preparation is an underappreciated part of science. Discoveries do not enter empty rooms. They enter fields with expectations. Deinonychus changed the expectations. It made paleontologists more ready to see dinosaur activity, bird ancestry, feather evolution, and behavioral complexity when later evidence appeared. That does not mean scientists forced the evidence to fit a trend. It means the conceptual frame had widened enough to receive it. Before the frame widened, some evidence could be overlooked or minimized. Thomas Huxley had argued for bird-dinosaur affinities in the 19th century, but the idea did not become dominant then. Archaeopteryx was known, but its implications were debated. The absence of clear dinosaurian clavicles and other anatomical concerns complicated the picture. Ostrom's comparisons helped revive and strengthen a connection that earlier science had not fully established. The history of bird origins is not a straight heroic line. It includes good ideas, wrong turns, missing fossils, taxonomic confusion, and changing methods. Deinonychus was one of the fossils that helped redirect the discussion, but the modern consensus emerged through many studies and many specimens. The animal is a turning point, not the whole road. In popular memory, though, turning points matter. They give a story a hinge. Deinonychus is that hinge for many people because it is easy to understand visually. One can look at the skeleton and see why it mattered. The lifted claw is memorable. The tail is clear. The arms are expressive. The body is readable. Some fossils are important but visually obscure. Deinonychus has both scientific significance and immediate presence. Presence is not the same as size. A small fossil can alter a large idea. The claw of Deinonychus did more to change dinosaur imagery than many larger skeletons. It showed that terror and elegance could occupy the same animal. It made the predator seem not like a crude engine, but like a coordinated body. That coordination is what the old image had lacked. The old image had its own beauty. There is something grand about the swamp murals and lumbering silhouettes of earlier dinosaur art. They belong to the history of science and culture. But they were not the final word. Deinonychus did not erase them with contempt. It made them historical. It turned them into artifacts of how humans once imagined the Mesozoic. Every generation has its own dinosaurs: the tail-dragging brontosaur, the upright tyrannosaur, the naked movie raptor, the feathered dromaeosaur, the bird as living dinosaur. Each image says something about available evidence and something about the imagination of the time. Our current image will change too. Future fossils may alter the plumage, behavior, growth, or ecology of Deinonychus again. That possibility should be welcome. A fossil animal is not diminished by being revised. It becomes more real. The slashing monster was exciting, but the gripping, feathered, socially ambiguous predator is more alive. It has constraints. It has uncertainty. It has ecology. It has a place in evolution. It can be studied rather than merely feared. The term raptor itself carries a double history. In modern zoology, raptors are birds of prey, animals that seize food with talons. In dinosaur paleontology and popular culture, raptor usually refers to dromaeosaurids and their close relatives, the sickle-clawed theropods. Deinonychus connects these meanings. It was a dinosaurian raptor, and it helped reveal why avian raptors are part of the dinosaur story. A hawk descending into grass is not reenacting Deinonychus exactly, but it can help the mind understand gripping predation. The talons close, the wings flare for balance, the body pins, the beak tears. That living behavior gives a modern reference point for an extinct anatomy. Comparisons must be careful, but without living animals, fossil bones can become too abstract. The danger in analogy is overconfidence. Hawks are birds with flight, perching feet, and modern ecological pressures. Deinonychus was a terrestrial non-avian theropod with different proportions and a long, stiffened tail. The analogy works only in limited ways. It suggests that the enlarged claw may have helped restrain prey rather than slash it. It does not turn Deinonychus into an eagle on the ground. The same caution applies to crocodiles, Komodo dragons, wolves, lions, and every other living comparison. Each model illuminates one part and distorts another. Wolves help us imagine coordinated hunting, but may overstate cooperation. Komodo dragons help us imagine feeding aggregations and aggression, but may understate bird-like cognition. Hawks help us understand talons, but may overstate avian similarity. The extinct animal sits between models. That is why Deinonychus remains scientifically useful. It resists a single modern comparison. It is not a wolf, not a lizard, not an eagle, not a big cat. It is a dromaeosaurid theropod. To understand it, we borrow from living animals, test the borrowings against bone, and discard what does not fit. The animal becomes clearer not when we find the perfect analogy, but when we understand the limits of every analogy. The public image often skipped those limits. It wanted the pack. It wanted the slashing claw. It wanted the intelligent killer. Science has slowly made the image less simple. Deinonychus may still have been highly dangerous, but danger is not the same as cinematic malice. It may still have gathered with others, but gathering is not the same as disciplined strategy. It may still have used the claw violently, but violence is not the same as disemboweling cuts. A real attack, if preserved somehow beyond bones, would probably look chaotic. Dust, feathers, slipping feet, twisting prey, missed bites, sudden retreats, repeated attempts, exhaustion. The predator trying to stay above the dangerous limbs of the animal beneath it. The prey trying to roll, kick, or wrench free. No clean choreography, just bodies under stress, each one acting from instinct, pain, and urgency. Most attacks would leave no fossil evidence. A failed lunge disappears instantly. A successful kill may be consumed and scattered. A small prey animal vanishes into digestion. Only rare events enter sediment. This means our view of predation is biased toward the unusual: bone beds, associations, shed teeth, healed wounds, and trackways. The ordinary lives of predators are mostly invisible. Invisibility should not be mistaken for absence. Deinonychus must have eaten many times for every trace it left. It must have walked thousands of steps for every footprint preserved. It must have displayed, rested, and interacted far more often than the fossil record can show. Paleontology is a science of fragments, and one of its skills is knowing how much life lies outside the fragment. The fragment of the claw is enough to begin. From the bone, we infer the keratin sheath. From the joint, we infer mobility. From the raised digit, we infer protection from wear. From comparison, we infer possible function. From association with prey, we infer feeding relationships. From relatives, we infer feathers. From birds, we infer deep evolutionary continuity. The chain is long, but each link is examined. The quarry maps are another kind of fragment. They show where bones lay in relation to one another. A femur here, teeth there, vertebrae nearby. The position of each element can suggest whether a skeleton was articulated, whether water moved the bones, whether scavengers disturbed the carcass, whether multiple individuals accumulated over time. Before the animal becomes a mount, it is a pattern on a quarry floor. That pattern can be messy. Fossils are rarely found as clean skeletons waiting politely in anatomical order. They are crushed, scattered, incomplete, weathered, mixed, and distorted. Preparation can take years. Interpretation requires patience. The public sees the finished skeleton, but the scientific work begins in the confusion of stone. There is something fitting about Deinonychus emerging from confusion. It clarified dinosaurs by first appearing as fragments that had to be understood. The revolution was not born from a perfect fossil lying open like an answer. It came from careful recognition, from noticing that a collection of bones belonged to an animal, unlike the one paleontology expected. In that sense, the Raptor revolution is a story about attention. Attention to a toe, attention to a wrist, attention to posture, attention to old assumptions, attention to birds, attention to the possibility that the Mesozoic was more active, more feathered, and more behaviorally rich than the inherited images suggested. The fossil did not need to be complete to be transformative. It needed to be seen clearly. Seeing clearly also meant letting go. Letting go of tails as props, letting go of dinosaurs as evolutionary failures, letting go of birds as separate from the dinosaur story. Letting go, later, of the naked raptor and the simple pack. Each release made the animal less familiar in the short term and more accurate in the long term. Accuracy can feel strange at first. A feathered raptor may seem wrong to someone raised on scaly versions, even though feathers are better supported. A horizontal tyrannosaur once seemed odd after decades of upright mounts. Scientific realism often has to overcome nostalgia. The past is not obligated to match the first image that captured us. Deinonychus has survived those changes because its importance does not depend on one outdated restoration. The core remains, an early Cretaceous dromaeosaurid from North America, named by Ostrom in 1969, with a specialized second toe, grasping forelimbs, a stiffened tail, and deep relevance to the Dinosaur Renaissance and bird origins. Around that core, the feathers, behavior, and ecological details continue to sharpen. A viewer standing before a modern reconstruction may notice the feathers first. The animal might look more like a groundhog crossed with something older and stranger. The arms carry plumage. The tail has texture. The face is alert. The foot remains lethal. This is not a compromise between bird and reptile. It is a dinosaur restored with evidence that birds are part of the dinosaur family. The result is more alien than the movie version. Scales alone make a raptor easy to place in the category of reptile monster. Feathers complicate it. They bring warmth, display, bird ancestry, and softness into the same body as teeth and claws. They make the predator feel less like a fantasy creature and more like an evolutionary reality that does not fit our simple categories. Categories are often the problem. Reptile, bird, monster, predator, pack hunter. Scavenger, warm-blooded, cold-blooded. These words help, but they can harden too quickly. Deinonychus lived before our categories and across several of them. Its body carried traits that later humans would divide into separate boxes. The revolution was partly the realization that the boxes were wrong. Birds are not separate from reptiles in the broad evolutionary sense. They are highly modified archosaurs. Dinosaurs are not all giant failures. One branch survives in birds. Raptors are not scaled wolves. They are feathered theropods with their own possible social lives. The more carefully we place Deinonychus, the more the living world shifts around it. A chicken foot on soil, a hawk talon closing on prey, an ostrich running, a raven folding its wing, all become faintly connected to the bones from Montana. Not because any one modern bird is the same as Deinonychus, but because evolution preserves patterns through modification. The Mesozoic is not sealed completely behind extinction. Some of its architecture still moves. This is the quiet power of the raptor revolution. It did not merely make dinosaurs faster. It made them closer. Not close in time, but close in continuity. The bird outside is not a metaphor for dinosaurs. It is part of the dinosaur lineage. The feather is not decoration added to a reptile. It is an ancient structure with a history deeper than flight. Deinonychus helped people see that continuity. The animal did not sing. It did not perch like a modern bird. It did not survive into the present. But its bones helped restore the path between non-avian dinosaurs and birds. In doing so, it changed the emotional distance between the Mesozoic and the modern world. Emotional distance matters because deep time can otherwise become too abstract. 115 million years is beyond normal imagination. The number is large enough to flatten into meaninglessness. But a claw can be understood. A foot held off the ground can be understood. A bird folding its wing can be seen today. Through these smaller anchors, the enormous time span becomes approachable. The early Cretaceous animal itself remains far away. Its world had different coastlines, different climates, different plant communities, different skies, and different dangers. North America was not the continent we know now. The Rockies were not yet the mountains they would become. The inland sea that later split the continent had not reached its full extent. Rivers crossed lowlands that are now rock, badlands, and museum collections. Those badlands are not empty. They are pages tilted into sunlight. Layers of sandstone and mudstone record channels, floods, soils, and droughts. A paleontologist walking there looks for small interruptions, a curve of bone weathering from a slope, a tooth glinting among pebbles, a color change in sediment, a fragment that does not belong to ordinary stone. Discovery often begins with noticing that one shape is wrong. Once found, the fossil must be protected from the very erosion that revealed it. Jackets of plaster and burlap hold fragile bones. Field notes record position. Maps preserve context. The specimen travels from heat and dust to preparation lab, from rock to recognition. A fossil animal passes through human hands before it can enter scientific language. The language can be dry, but it is powerful. Terms like pes, manus, caudal vertebrae, presygapophyses, chevrons, unguals, and dromaeosaurid may seem distant from the living animal. Yet they are the tools that let scientists describe it precisely. Without precision, the revolution becomes only enthusiasm. With precision, enthusiasm becomes evidence. Ostrom's descriptions emphasize the unusual anatomy of the foot, hand, and tail. The pes bore the specialized second digit. The manus was raptorial. The tail vertebrae carried long rods that stiffened the structure. These anatomical details are not decorative. They are the factual heart of Deinonychus as a scientific animal. Everything else, from artwork to behavior, grows from them. Even the name Terrible Claw should not narrow the animal too much. The claw is famous, but the whole body matters. A claw without the limb to place it, the tail to balance it, the hands to assist it, and the teeth to follow it would not define the predator. Evolution integrated the parts. Paleontology must do the same. Integration is what separates a skeleton from a list of bones. The femur and tibia speak to locomotion. The pelvis speaks to posture. The tail speaks to balance. The skull speaks to feeding. The hands speak to grasping. The feathers inferred from relatives speak to insulation and display. The environment speaks to ecology. The result is an animal reconstructed across scales, from microscopic bone tissue to continental change. Continental change moved silently beneath the entire story. During the Cretaceous, the world was warm, sea levels were often high, and land masses continued to separate. Ecosystems became more regional as continents drifted apart. Dinosaur evolution followed those separations. Raptor lineages diversified across different lands, each shaped by local prey, climate, vegetation, and chance. Deinonychus was a North American expression of that broader dromaeosaurid success. It was not isolated from the history of Asia's raptors or from later giant forms. The similarities reveal shared ancestry. The differences reveal time and geography. A family of animals spread across the Cretaceous world, and one member of that family happened to be discovered at the right moment to transform science. Chance is everywhere in this story. Chance in preservation, chance in discovery, chance in the survival of a paper, a drawing, a museum mount, chance in a young scientist seeing a fossil and asking a question differently. But chance alone is not enough. The bones had to contain real significance. Deinonychus changed paleontology because, once noticed, it could withstand scrutiny. Scrutiny continues. Researchers revisit old specimens with new methods. CT scanning can reveal internal anatomy. Biomechanical modeling can test claw function. Isotopy analysis can explore diet. Phylogenetic studies can refine relationships. New fossils from other places can change the inferred appearance of old species. The Deinonychus of today is built not only from 1969, but from decades of work after it. This ongoing revision is why a modern script about Deinonychus should not simply repeat the older heroic image of Ostrom discovering the pack-hunting killer claw. That is part of the history, but not the whole truth. The better story is more nuanced. Ostrom identified an animal that challenged old views. Later research supported some implications, revised others, and opened new questions. The revolution matured. A mature revolution is less dramatic but more durable. It can survive losing some of its early claims because the foundation is broader than any single claim. If the claw was used for gripping rather than slashing, Deinonychus remains important. If pack hunting is uncertain, Deinonychus remains important. If feathering changes the silhouette, Deinonychus remains important. The central transformation still stands. What stands is the recognition of dinosaurs as active, evolving, complex animals deeply connected to birds. That recognition reshaped everything from museum displays to technical research. It made the Mesozoic feel inhabited rather than merely populated by skeletons. It turned dinosaur paleontology toward life processes. Deinonychus was not the whole Renaissance, but it was one of the bones around which the new vision crystallized. The animal's fame can sometimes obscure its scientific humility. It is known from partial skeletons, not from a perfect frozen body. Its feathers are inferred, not directly preserved. Its colors are unknown. Its social behavior is debated. Its exact hunting technique is modeled, not filmed. These limits are not failures. They are the normal conditions of studying an animal that vanished more than 100 million years ago. A trustworthy reconstruction should sound like the evidence. It can say, likely, probably, suggests, may have, and remains uncertain. These words are not weakness. They are honesty. The fossil record is powerful because it gives direct evidence of ancient life, but it is incomplete. The raptor revolution began by challenging assumptions, and it should not replace old assumptions with new overconfidence. This is especially important with behavior. Bones can reveal potential. Behavior is potential expressed in context. A grasping foot suggests a way of using prey. It does not tell us every prey item. Multiple individuals near a carcass suggest association. They do not prove cooperative planning. Feathers suggest insulation and display. They do not tell us the colors unless pigments are preserved. The animal must remain partly unknown. The unknown is not empty. It is where the animal keeps some of its distance. We can restore the curve of the claw, the tilt of the body, the stiffness of the tail, the likely covering of feathers. But the exact sound it made on a humid morning, the way it moved when unobserved, the pressure of its foot on living mud, the recognition between two individuals, those things are gone. What remains is enough to matter. A fossil does not have to give everything. Deinonychus gives a body that changed the questions. It gives a predator connected to birds. It gives a foot that still draws the eye. It gives a quarry relationship with Deinonychus that keeps behavior under debate. It gives a story about how science revises not only facts, but imagination. Imagine the claw again, no longer alone in a drawer. Place it back into the foot. Add tendons, muscles, skin, keratin, feathers above the ankle, and the weight of the animal balanced over the other toes. Put the foot on damp Cretaceous ground. Around it, the floodplain holds plant stems, insect movement, distant herbivore tracks, and the smell of water. The claw is lifted, not because it is symbolic, but because that is how the animal works. The body follows. Hips level. Tail stretched behind. Arms partly folded. Head moving with quick attention. Feathers rising slightly along the neck. The animal pauses, then steps. One foot presses down with the outer toes. The second claw remains raised. The track left behind is incomplete in the way dromaeosaur tracks are incomplete. A trace of absence as much as presence. Absence is part of every fossil. The missing toe mark tells us the claw was held up. The missing feathers on Deinonychus are filled cautiously by relatives. The missing behavior is approached through anatomy and living comparisons. The missing world is rebuilt from sediment and associated species. Paleontology is the study of what remains, but it is also the disciplined study of what does not. From that discipline came a new dinosaur, not new to the Cretaceous, but new to us. A dinosaur that could no longer be contained by the old swamp. A dinosaur that made bird ancestry visible. A dinosaur that showed how a medium-sized predator could carry a revolution larger than its own body. Deinonychus did not need to be enormous, it needed to be anatomically undeniable. The revolution it sparked reached beyond raptors. Sauropods were rethought as living giants with complex biology. Hadrosaurs were studied for growth and social behavior. Ceratopsians became animals of display and herding, not just horned skulls. Tyrannosaurs were remounted and reanalyzed. Dinosaur eggs, nests, bone beds, trackways, and feathers all entered a world more ready to interpret them as evidence of active lives. Yet raptors retained a special hold because they touched the bird question so directly. A feathered dromaeosaurid makes the boundary between dinosaur and bird feel porous. It shows predation and plumage together. It shows that flight-related structures may have histories before flight. It shows that the road to birds passed through animals that were still fully part of terrestrial dinosaur ecosystems. The word fully matters. Deinonychus was not half a dinosaur and half a bird. It was completely itself. Transitional animals are often misunderstood as incomplete, as if they are waiting to become something else. But evolution does not produce animals for future categories. Archaeopteryx was a complete animal. Deinonychus was a complete animal. Each was adapted to its own life, even if later humans used their bodies to understand transitions. To call Deinonychus bird-like is useful, but only if it does not erase its own ecology. It was a predator in early Cretaceous North America, not a prototype designed for birds. Its claws, teeth, tail, and limbs served immediate survival. The fact that some of those features illuminate bird evolution is a consequence visible to us, not a purpose visible to the animal. This distinction makes evolution more beautiful, not less. Feathers can begin as insulation and later become display, brooding structures, aerodynamic surfaces, or all of these in different lineages. A grasping motion can serve predation before related anatomy contributes to perching or flight. Structures accumulate histories. They do not arrive with labels. The Raptor revolution is therefore a story about exaptation, the reuse of existing features for new functions. It asks us to see bodies as historical documents. A bird wing is not only a wing, it is a modified forelimb with a deep past. A raptor claw is not only a weapon, it is part of a foot with evolutionary relationships to other grasping and predatory structures. Every feature carries earlier possibilities within it. Look at the hand of Deinonychus. 3 fingers, curved claws, a wrist that can fold. In another lineage, over long spans of time, forelimb feathers and wrist mechanics become part of powered flight. In Deinonychus, those parts remain grounded. The same anatomical neighborhood can lead to different lives. Evolution is not a highway. It is a delta, branching, splitting, drying, flooding, and leaving traces in unexpected places. A delta is an apt image for the world of Deinonychus as well. Rivers crossing lowlands, sediment spreading, channels shifting, bones buried in layers. The environment itself branched and reworked. The fossil record of the animal was made by moving water, and the evolutionary history it helped illuminate also moved through branching paths. Both geology and biology resist straight lines. Straight lines are easier to narrate, but they are rarely true. The old story said dinosaurs were slow, then Deinonychus proved they were fast. The better story says dinosaur biology was diverse, old assumptions were too narrow, and Deinonychus helped open a more complex view. The old story said raptors hunted in packs. The better story says some evidence suggests association and feeding, but complex cooperative hunting remains uncertain. The better story is slower, but stronger. Slowness in explanation does not mean slowness in the animal. Deinonychus may have moved with sudden speed when it had to. The muscles of the hind limb would contract, the body pitch forward, the tail adjust, the arms open or brace, and the feet strike. The fossil body suggests quick moments. The scientific story requires patience to understand them. Patience is what the bones have had. More than 100 million years in rock, then decades in collections, then generations of study. Human attention is brief compared with fossil time. A paper published in 1969 feels old to science and impossibly recent to the animal. Deinonychus waded through the rise and fall of worlds before becoming evidence. When its evidence arrived, it did not merely add one more dinosaur name to a list. It changed the tone of dinosaur paleontology. The Mesozoic became faster, warmer, more feathered, more bird-connected. That tone influenced how new fossils were imagined even before they were fully understood. A field can have a mood, and Deinonychus altered the mood from heavy to alert. Alert is the word that returns again and again. The skeleton looks alert. The restoration looks alert. The scientific questions became alert. Paleontology itself seemed to lift its tail and raise its head. The animal's posture became a metaphor, but it was a metaphor grounded in anatomy. That is why it endured. A living Deinonychus would not hold a dramatic pose forever. It would relax. It would sit. It would pant in heat. It would fold its limbs under its body. It would scratch at parasites. It would avoid confrontation when full. Predators spend much of life doing nothing spectacular. The revolution should make room for stillness as well as action. Stillness on the floodplain might be the most honest image. The animal crouched in shade, feathers lying flat, eyes half open, tail curved just enough to fit among plants, insects moving around it. A distant herbivore cracking branches, water slipping past a muddy bank. No attack, no roar. Only an animal alive in its own moment, unaware that its bones will one day reorder ours. That quiet image also helps correct another distortion. Dinosaurs did not constantly roar. The soundscape of the Cretaceous would have included calls, hisses, low-frequency sounds, wing beats, splashing, insect noise, wind, rain, and footfalls. But the constant monstrous roaring of films is more human theater than paleobiology. Deinonychus may have vocalized, perhaps with calls shaped by its throat and airways, but we do not know the exact sound. Because birds and crocodilians are the living brackets around extinct dinosaurs, researchers can infer that many dinosaurs used some form of vocal communication. But the details are difficult. Soft tissues rarely preserve. A skull can suggest resonance spaces in some dinosaurs, but Deinonychus does not give us a complete voice. It may have hissed, barked, boomed, chirped, or made sounds unlike any simple modern comparison. The safest reconstruction is uncertainty. Uncertainty, again, makes the animal more real. A known monster is less alive than an unknown animal constrained by evidence. The mystery that remains around Deinonychus is not a failure of science. It is the natural result of time. The revolution did not solve the animal completely. It made the animal worth asking about in better ways. Better questions now include how dromaeosaurids varied by habitat, how their claws functioned across species, how feathers changed through growth, how juveniles avoided adults, how feeding traces formed, how social behavior can be tested in fossils, and how closely ground-based predation connects to the origins of avian flight. These questions are more specific than the old debate over whether dinosaurs were sluggish or active. That specificity is progress. Progress can be seen in the way modern paleontologists avoid simple claims when the data are ambiguous. Deinonychus did not definitely hunt like wolves. Its claw did not definitely slice open prey in the old dramatic way. Its feathers cannot be colored with certainty. Its exact metabolism cannot be reduced to a slogan. What can be said is already remarkable enough. It was a feathered or very likely feathered dromaeosaurid predator of early Cretaceous North America. It had a specialized foot with an enlarged second claw. It had grasping hands and a stiffened tail. It fed in some relationship with Tenontosaurus. It helped revive the dinosaur bird hypothesis and helped spark the Dinosaur Renaissance. It changed how dinosaurs were mounted, drawn, filmed, studied, and imagined. That is a large legacy for a medium-sized animal. It suggests that importance in paleontology is not measured only in tons. Sometimes it is measured in how many assumptions a fossil breaks. Deinonychus broke the assumption that dinosaurs were merely heavy reptiles of a failed past. It showed that a dinosaur could look forward toward birds while still being rooted in predatory life on the ground. The phrase "look forward" is human language. Evolution does not look forward, but we do, standing after the fact, tracing connections from fossil to bird, from claw to talon, from wrist to wing, from quarry to museum. We cannot help seeing direction because we know what came later. The challenge is to see direction without pretending the animal itself was aiming there. Deinonychus was not aiming at birds. It was aiming, if the word can be used at all, at prey, mates, shelter, and survival. The bird connection is the shape we see from outside the animal's life. The animal's own world was immediate. A movement in ferns, a scent near water, a rival too close, a juvenile keeping distance, a drying season, a carcass, a flood. Fossils compress those immediate things into stone. A single bone can hold growth lines, muscle scars, injuries, and evolutionary relationships, but it cannot hold the full pressure of a day. To make a documentary voiceover from such evidence is to move between scale and restraint. The words must travel from claw to continent, then return to the claw before the animal dissolves into abstraction. So, return to the claw. It is still curved. It is still mineralized. It still rests under controlled museum light, or in a published figure, separated from the foot that once lifted it. The keratin sheath is gone. The tendons are gone. The animal's intention is gone. But the shape remains forceful enough to carry the question across time: what kind of dinosaur needed this? The answer is not simply a killer. The answer is a balanced predator, a grasping animal, a feathered theropod, a relative of the bird line, a floodplain hunter and scavenger, a creature that lived among larger herbivores and dangerous competitors. The answer is also a scientific turning point, because the body of this animal made the old image of dinosaurs feel too small. As the image expanded, dinosaurs became more varied. Some were giants with tiny heads, some were armored low browsers, some were horned herd animals, some were duck-billed plant processors, some were feathered predators, some were small enough to perch or glide. Some survived as birds. Deinonychus did not contain all of this diversity, but it helped paleontology see it with new eyes. The revolution continues whenever a new fossil changes a reconstruction. A patch of preserved skin can alter texture. A feather impression can alter silhouette. A trackway can alter locomotion. A bone bed can alter social interpretation. A chemical signal in a tooth can alter diet. These are not small corrections. They are the way extinct animals return, not as fantasies, but as increasingly precise possibilities. Precision has its own beauty. The angle of a joint, the curve of a claw, the spacing of teeth, the thickness of a tail rod, the microscopic structure of bone, the chemical ratio in enamel, the sediment around a skeleton. Each detail is modest alone. Together, they can overturn a century of imagery. Deinonychus teaches that the past is not always corrected by the largest discoveries. Sometimes it is corrected by the right combination of details. A foot specialization here, a bird-like wrist there, a tail unlike the old restorations, a repeated association with prey, a scientist willing to see that these details did not fit the inherited model. The revolution began in anatomy before it became atmosphere. The atmosphere came later, in art, museum halls, films, and public fascination. Raptors became symbols of dinosaur intelligence and speed. They also became exaggerated. The task now is to keep the energy of that fascination while returning to the quieter animal beneath it. Deinonychus is more than a cinematic ancestor. It is a fossil organism with its own evidence and its own limits. Limits do not close the story. They keep it honest. We can imagine the animal moving under conifers, but we should not claim to know every step. We can picture feathers, but not exact colors. We can discuss group feeding, but not declare wolf-like strategy. We can infer grasping predation, but not film the attack in our minds as certainty. The real past deserves that care. Care is also owed to the prey. Tyrannosaurus should not exist only as raptor food. It was a successful herbivore with its own life history, growth, senses, and social possibilities. It browsed, moved, reproduced, and survived in the same floodplain systems. Its fossils became linked to Deinonychus because of death and feeding, but its life was larger than the moment predators entered the scene. Prey animals shape predators as much as predators shape prey. The size and resistance of Tyrannosaurus may have influenced how Deinonychus used its body. Smaller prey may have shaped juvenile diets. Armored dinosaurs may have been avoided. The presence of larger predators may have forced raptors into certain niches. Ecology is reciprocal. No animal evolves alone. The plants shaped them all. Tough foliage, seasonal abundance, water availability, and habitat structure influenced where herbivores fed and where predators searched. Early flowering plants may have begun altering parts of the landscape, but the world remained heavily populated by older plant groups. A Deinonychus moving through that environment moved through a botanical world mostly gone from the modern eye. The absence of grass alone changes the image. No open lawn beneath the raptor's feet. No modern meadow. Instead, mats of ferns, bare mud, conifer litter, cycad leaves, horsetails near water, and patches of early angiosperms beginning a revolution of their own. The raptor revolution in human science happened long after the flowering plant revolution in Earth history had begun. But Deinonychus lived near the early edge of that botanical transformation. The Cretaceous would become a time of flowers, new insects, new herbivore adaptations, and changing ecosystems. Deinonychus lived before that transformation was complete. Its world still held a strong Jurassic inheritance in its plants and many of its dinosaur body plans, even as newer Cretaceous patterns emerged. It stood in a transitional world and later became a transitional fossil in human understanding. Transitional does not mean incomplete. It means historically revealing. The early Cretaceous itself was historically revealing, a time between the classic Jurassic giants and the late Cretaceous worlds of tyrannosaurs, ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, and flowering plant-dominated landscapes. Deinonychus belongs to this middle stretch where old and new elements overlapped. That overlap may be one reason the animal feels so potent. It carries the last echo of older dinosaur imagery and the first clear force of the modern one. It is Cretaceous, but it remakes how we see the whole Mesozoic. It is grounded, but it points toward birds. It is extinct, but it changes how living birds are understood. It is only one species, but it rearranges a category. A category rearranged can make the world feel unfamiliar. The sparrow is a dinosaur. The feather is older than flight. The raptor claw may grip more than slash. A fossil predator can be both frightening and bird-like. The Mesozoic is not a row of monsters, but a long sequence of living ecosystems. These are simple sentences now, but each one had to be earned. They were earned through fieldwork, comparison, argument, and revision. They were earned by scientists willing to reopen questions that seemed settled. They were earned by fossils that survived long enough to challenge certainty. Deinonychus was one of those fossils. It did not answer everything, but it made the old answers inadequate. Inadequacy is often the beginning of understanding. When an old explanation no longer fits, the mind has to move. Ostrom looked at Deinonychus and saw a dinosaur that made the old sluggish model fail. Later scientists looked at raptor fossils and saw that some early dramatic interpretations also failed. Each failure brought the reconstruction closer to the animal. The process is still unfinished. Future discoveries may find direct feathers associated with Deinonychus or a close North American relative. New trackways may clarify locomotion. More isotope work may refine diet. Better biomechanical models may alter claw function. Additional quarry data may strengthen or weaken social interpretations. The animal's scientific life continues because the questions remain alive. That continuing life is part of why dinosaurs hold attention. They are ancient, but not static. Our knowledge of them changes fast enough that a child's dinosaur book can become outdated within a decade. Deinonychus is a perfect example. The animal that once proved dinosaurs could be active is now used to discuss feathers, prey restraint, isotope chemistry, ontogenetic diet shifts, and the origin of flight behaviors. A fossil from 1969 can still be modern if the questions around it keep evolving. Deinonychus is not locked in the year it was named. It belongs to every later study that tests its meaning. The raptor revolution did not end when the first active reconstructions appeared. It continued as the raptor itself became more complicated. Complication is not a loss of wonder. It is a better wonder. The feathered, gripping, uncertain, bird-adjacent Deinonychus is more wondrous than the simple killer because it belongs to a real evolutionary world. It has relatives, constraints, unknowns, and consequences. It is not merely exciting. It is informative. There is another quieter revolution inside the raptor revolution, and it concerns scale. For much of popular dinosaur history, importance followed size. The largest skeletons drew the crowds. The longest necks, the tallest backs, the heaviest skulls, the widest horns, these were the things that seemed to define the dinosaur age. Deinonychus shifted attention toward smaller structures. A wrist could matter. A toe could matter. A tail stiffened by narrow rods could matter. A medium-sized predator could redirect the interpretation of an entire group. That change affected how paleontologists looked at other small theropods. Instead of treating them as minor animals beside giants, researchers began to see them as central to questions of behavior and evolution. Small bodies preserve the experiments that large bodies sometimes hide. Feathers are easier to connect to thermoregulation in a small predator. Balance and grasping are clearer in an animal built around agility. The origin of birds was never going to be solved by the largest dinosaurs. It depended on the smaller, more delicate branches of the theropod tree. Delicacy does not always preserve. A small bone can vanish before burial. A feather can rot in hours. A thin skull can collapse under sediment. Many of the animals most important for understanding bird origins must have disappeared without trace. Deinonychus survived in enough detail to be read, and that survival gave it a voice far larger than its body. It is a reminder that the fossil record is not a census of the past. It is a biased archive of accidents. Bias matters when reconstructing raptor diversity. The best-known fossils are not always the most common animals in life. Some environments preserve large bones better than small ones. Some quarries are searched more heavily than others. Some formations are easier to access. A dinosaur can seem rare because it truly was rare, or because its body, habitat, and burial conditions worked against preservation. Deinonychus is famous partly because enough of it survived, and partly because the right people studied it at the right time. Fame can make an extinct animal seem inevitable. Looking backward, it feels as though Deinonychus was always destined to change paleontology. But no fossil is destined to be found. Had the bones weathered away a few centuries earlier, had the quarry been missed, had the fragments remained unprepared, the Dinosaur Renaissance would still have happened through other evidence, but perhaps with a different emblem and a different pace. The revolution had many causes, yet this particular animal gave it a memorable shape. That shape entered popular culture with unusual force. The raptor became a symbol of a new kind of dinosaur, not the massive thunder of a sauropod or the skull-dominated terror of Tyrannosaurus, but a lean, fast, coordinated predator that could fit into hallways, forests, kitchens, and nightmares. Popular culture exaggerated, but it exaggerated from a real scientific turn. The public raptor was born from the scientific Deinonychus, even when the name on the screen was different. It is easy to criticize the exaggerations, and sometimes necessary, but the cultural impact also brought people back to the fossils. Many future paleontologists first met raptors through inaccurate images, and then learned why the real animals were better. The naked movie Predator led some viewers toward feathered reconstructions. The simple pack hunter led them toward debates about social behavior. The monster became a doorway into anatomy, geology, and evolutionary history. Science communication often works through such doorways. A dramatic image captures attention. Evidence then complicates it. The best outcome is not that the first image remains untouched, but that curiosity survives correction. Deinonychus has been corrected many times and remains compelling. That is a sign of a strong fossil story. It does not collapse when the simple version is removed. The animal's connection to birds gives it a second doorway, one that opens not into fear, but into continuity. A person may come for the claw and leave looking differently at pigeons, crows, hawks, chickens, ostriches, and sparrows. The Cretaceous predator becomes part of a larger recognition that the ordinary modern world is full of ancient inheritance. Evolution does not always hide in remote places. Sometimes it lands on a windowsill. A crow walking across pavement moves with quick corrections of the head and feet. Its toes flex, its feathers shift. It watches with an alertness that feels old even in a city. The comparison should remain modest, but it changes the imagination. The bird is not a living Deinonychus, yet it preserves enough dinosaurian history to make the fossil less unreachable. The line between then and now becomes thinner. This thinning of the line was one of the great achievements of the Dinosaur Renaissance. It transformed dinosaurs from a dead-end group into part of an ongoing evolutionary story. Non-avian dinosaurs vanished, but dinosaurs as a clade did not. The survival of birds means that the Mesozoic has descendants not only in museum halls but in forests, shorelines, deserts, farms, and cities. Deinonychus helped make that statement scientifically and culturally legible. Legibility does not mean simplicity. The evolutionary tree around Deinonychus contains branching relationships that have been revised many times. Dromaeosaurids, troodontids, avialans, and other paravians sit close together in a region of the tree where small changes in fossil interpretation can alter relationships. Some studies place certain groups closer to birds than others. New fossils can shift the arrangement. The overall dinosaurian origin of birds is strong, but the fine branching pattern remains an active field. Active fields are healthy fields. They revise because new evidence appears, and because old evidence is examined with better methods. Deinonychus no longer has to carry the entire bird origin argument by itself. It now stands among many feathered and bird-like theropods. Its role has changed from lonely witness to historical catalyst. That change is itself evidence of progress. A catalyst is not consumed by the reaction. Deinonychus remains what it was, a predator from the early Cretaceous, while the science around it expands. The animal is still there in the drawer and the mount. The claw still curves, the tail still balances, the hands still reach. Around it, new fossils gather like voices, each adding context to what the first bones began to say. One of those contextual voices comes from trackways. A trackway is a rare kind of evidence because it records movement directly. It does not tell us the name of the animal with perfect certainty, but it can preserve gait, direction, speed estimates, group movement, and foot posture. Dromaeosaurid tracks with the second toe held off the ground support what the skeleton suggests. The famous claw was not simply decorative, it was carried differently. Tracks also complicate social interpretations. Parallel trackways can show animals moving in the same direction at around the same time, but they do not automatically prove coordinated hunting. Animals may gather near water, migrate through the same corridor, follow shorelines, or move together for reasons unrelated to predation. As with bones near carcasses, trackways reveal association more easily than intention. They are precious evidence, but they still require caution. The difference between association and intention is the shadow behind every raptor scene. Several footprints on one surface, several teeth near one skeleton, several individuals in one quarry. The mind wants to turn these into plans. The rock only records proximity. To move from proximity to behavior, scientists must bring in anatomy, taphonomy, living comparisons, and a willingness to stop short of certainty. Stopping short is not the same as refusing to imagine. It is imagining with boundaries. Deinonychus can be shown near a Tenontosaurus carcass. It can be shown gripping prey of manageable size. It can be shown feathered, alert, balanced, and wary. It can be shown interacting with another individual, but the interaction should carry ambiguity. Are they cooperating, competing, courting, threatening, or simply tolerating one another? The fossil evidence leaves room for several answers. Ambiguity may have been part of the living animal's social world too. Even modern animals do not always behave in categories convenient for textbooks. A predator may tolerate a sibling one day and fight it the next. It may feed near others without planning with them. It may learn from the presence of conspecifics without forming stable packs. It may gather seasonally and disperse afterward. Extinct behavior was likely just as messy. Messiness is life. Clean diagrams come later. A living floodplain is full of overlapping motives: hunger, fear, mating, dominance, thirst, fatigue, curiosity, and reaction. Deinonychus moved through that mess with a brain and body shaped for its own needs. The more we allow for messiness, the less it resembles a movie monster, and the more it resembles an animal that could have truly lived. The true animal is enough. A feathered predator stepping through Cretaceous mud, carrying a raised claw and a stiffened tail, connected by ancestry to birds and by discovery to a revolution in science, does not need embellishment. It already holds deep time, anatomy, behavior, uncertainty, and cultural transformation in one body. The final consequence reaches into the present. Birds are dinosaurs. That fact is repeated often, but it should not become casual. It means the dinosaur body plan did not end in ash at the end of the Cretaceous. It means the Mesozoic still has a living branch. It means the study of a raptor foot can illuminate the talons of modern birds, and the study of modern birds can help interpret an extinct predator's claws. A hawk lifting from a branch carries a history older than flowers in their modern dominance, older than the Rocky Mountains in their present form, older than the extinction that ended the non-avian dinosaurs. Its feathers are modern and ancient at once. Its talons are not Deinonychus claws, but they belong to a world of grasping feet that makes the fossil claw easier to understand. The raptor revolution did not make dinosaurs into birds. Evolution had already done that in one branch. The revolution made humans recognize it. That recognition changed the emotional meaning of birds and the scientific meaning of dinosaurs. It made extinction and survival part of the same story. It made the Mesozoic less sealed away. Return now to the museum drawer. The claw is still. The label is small. The room is quiet. Outside, birds move through a world that Deinonychus never saw. The fossil does not move with them, but it helped reveal the connection. A curved bone from an early Cretaceous foot changed the posture of dinosaurs, the ancestry of birds, and the imagination of anyone willing to look closely. There is no need to make the ending louder than that. The revolution began with details: a lifted toe, a stiff tail, a grasping hand, a comparison made carefully across time. It continues in every feathered reconstruction, every remounted skeleton, every bird recognized as a living dinosaur. And somewhere in stone, still weathering from ancient floodplain rock, there may be another piece of Deinonychus, waiting to make the animal clearer. The mud is gone. The river has changed beyond recognition. The plants are coal, stone, dust, or nothing at all. Tenontosaurus no longer lowers its head to feed. The raptor no longer lifts its claw above the ground. But the shape remains, enough to tell us that the old world was quicker, warmer, stranger, and closer to birds than we once believed. A terrible claw rests in silence. Above it, in the living air, wings still fold and open.